Recently, while battling our way through traffic on assignment, and then struggling to find a spot in the congested parking lot after that, we, the First Issues team, started wondering how it could be that a country as young as ours appears to have failed to anticipate and cater for the growth of its commercial centers. And as a result, we find our roads and other resources taxed to the limit and failing to keep up with demand. With figures from the 2011 National Census indicating that there are 231,592 people living in Gaborone, 58,079 in the village of Mosienyane, and just east of the capital, 36,323 inhabitants in Tlokweng. We assumed that our numbers were probably the root cause of this congestion that we see our formal structures struggling with, while policemen are deployed onto our roads every morning to help with the surge of traffic from all the neighboring localities. Our conversations with urban designer Mr. Mosienyane and the mayor of Gaborone, Mr. Haskins Ngaigwa, revealed, however, that the problem was more fundamental than just poor town planning, and their knowledge of the complexities of what at first appeared to be a straightforward issue made for a very enlightening conversation. I am Nameto Sibina. Welcome to First Issues. Welcome back to First Issues, as we discuss the reasons behind the traffic congestion that we witness every day on the roads in our capital city. Our guest, Mr. Mosienyane, believes that despite the growth and numbers within our cities, there is still too few of us for the situation to be as it is. He says cities such as Bloemfontein in South Africa are roughly the size of Gaborone and have managed to prevent the levels of congestion and the taxing of resources that we are currently struggling with. To begin our conversation, we asked both him and the mayor of Gaborone how exactly it is we let our cities get to such a dire state.
Let me start by saying that indeed it is true that our roads are so congested in the city. That's why we are working on a plan with the World Bank to see to it that by 2015 we will have built better routes for the city that will be able to accommodate the number of traffic flow in the city. But we are not saying really it should be a solution. As you see nowadays, there are a lot of influx in terms of cars coming to the city almost on a daily basis because of the cars that we call imported cars into the city.
How is it, though, that the situation reached this state?
I think the planning authorities, when they did their planning, they never even thought that by now Gaborone would have grown to this extent in terms of the inflows of motor vehicles into the city. You should remember that when the country allowed imported cars to reach this country, more especially what you call imported second-hand cars to reach the country. This was never planned for, and indeed even our roads were not ready to accommodate such an influx into the city.
How do we find ourselves in the state that we find ourselves in?
It is quite not normal to have a city of 300 or less than 300,000 people to have congestions, particularly on an area the size of Gaborone. Gaborone is quite big and large for the size of population we're talking about. It's a sprawling town, and you'd expect it not to have congestions that it does have. The reason for that is manifold. One, you have roads in Gaborone that are not utilized by the general traffic. Majority of our roads are streets, which are dedicated to the dwellers who actually live on those streets and are not used by motorists who are moving between sections of town. Let me give you an example. We have cul-de-sacs, we have cross crescents, and those roads do not advance the onward movement of traffic to clear it from the city or between different areas or sections of town. That's the main reason. Other than that, one can argue that even with the number of cars in Gaborone, if you had to take the total footprint of vehicles moving at one time in Gaborone and take the area of all the roads in Gaborone at the same time, the ratio is so low that it does surprise people that we do have congestions. It's down to design and planning.
What Mr. Mosienyane describes is examples like this. Buffalo Close, where this road services the 8 houses or so along it and no more. One cannot cross over into streets just a few meters beyond when traveling by car. To get from Buffalo Close to Piri Crescent, which is visible but inaccessible, one would have to go back to North Ring Road to join the Notwane Road, then into Julius Nyerere Drive, and then turn into Piri Crescent. Some people may not understand the true implications of a highly congested city. Could you kindly elaborate on what those could be?
I would like to just as an example, or to make people aware of what can happen. Think of Lagos. Lagos got to a point where it was so congested, so untenable, very difficult to clean up, very difficult to move around Lagos, very difficult to do business and so on. The government moved to a completely new city called Abuja. Look at the case of Tanzania. Dar es Salaam was the seat of government. The government has moved to Dodoma. Just think of the cost. Let's talk about the value of Gaborone. Let's just think of the value of the properties owned by private sector as well as by government and parastatals and embassies. The value of the properties in Gaborone run into trillions of dollars, not even pula. If we were to move from Gaborone to somewhere else, think of what would have sunk in terms of the value of the city if we had to move out of it. The city will turn into what we call urban blight. It would become what we call Matlota in Batswana, or ghost towns and so on. Now, if you were to think of the cost, not only to the individuals, but to the city itself, it is quite serious. But to a more immediate fact is that a congested city is unhealthy. You breathe more of the fumes from cars. You get what is called road rage. People become very hypertensive about stopping too long on the roads. You get late to work. It's very costly to all business. You lose time and so on. It's just untenable. It's very difficult to and maybe the nicest and the most beautiful cities are efficient cities. A city becomes a city because of its efficiency of distribution and its efficiency of production. Those two elements determine whether it's a city or a village. Look, Soroe is still a village with more than 100,000 people, whilst Jwaneng is a town. Because Jwaneng, with less than 30,000 people, provides some efficiencies that Soroe or Kanye may not provide. This is why one of the major things that you have to consider, which is why we produce in cities and we perform specific services efficiently, we prefer to perform them in the cities, because the city is supposed to provide efficiency. Here in now, introduce the issue of transport. An efficient transportation is required for you to have to define a space or a place as a city. If your transport system is not up to scratch, you cannot argue to be a city. Let me say this. You know, you have what we call suburbs. Cities like Gaborone were intended to be suburbs right from the beginning, because by default or unknowingly, the original planners and town and designers did not think Gaborone would ever be bigger than 14,000 people. Within 10 years of starting Gaborone, it reached the mark of 70,000 people. Now, if we could not go beyond 14,000, we would forever be a suburb. And to be nice, we could have cul-de-sacs and crescents, and we could have smokeless and clean towns and so on. We are caught up with times. We cannot pretend that we can continue to be a suburb. The longer we stay as a suburb, the sooner we would actually become a village.
What could be the other factors that contribute to this situation?
When you have a city, you have to budget for so many aspects of the city. You have to budget for its water. You have to budget for its electricity. You have to budget for public transport system. At the beginning of every year, you have to put these budgets in place and try to, those are your missions. And you must do that if your vision is to have a successful, efficient, productive city. And our problem with Gaborone is every time you ask why our city is not performing, why suddenly you are getting some odors in town which are not pleasant because certain services are not being provided for, you are told there's no money. And you say, did you really ever budget for it? That is our biggest problem. There's no proper, realistic budgeting for all the shopping list that a city requires on a yearly basis. And prime in that shopping list is budgeting for public transport system. Gaborone must budget for public transport system and many other things. It's a shopping list and it must actually be addressed every year. And we cannot afford to be told there is no money. And there's money for salaries and there's no money for public transport system. No, it can't work because the two work together.
If there are issues with the budgeting system for the development of the infrastructure in our cities, could this factor be behind the problems we have currently been experiencing with the supply of water and electricity? Are these related to a fundamental budgeting problem?
Yes, indeed. You see, I may be putting it in a very simplistic manner. If you prepare a development plan for a town or a section of town, you actually do budget for what you are suggesting to be implemented. But it is when it gets to the level of city council or town council that that budget must be escalated from that particular plan to higher order plans through the ranks of the plans. There are so many plans, by the way, right up to the National Development Plan. When you hear the Minister of Finance presenting a national budget, he should be actually tapping from all the tributaries, the plan tributaries or the minor budgets from all over the country, from rural to urban to the city councils. And those budgets must actually be escalated right to the National Development Plan. And then we are budgeting. To actually have a figure to say it will cost so much. I mean, we've just finished the development plan of Gaborone and we have indicated the size of the public transport required system. We've indicated what it might cost. It's a budget. But unless that is escalated up, it's as good as just wasted. That's what we mean by budgeting.
What is currently happening in Botswana in general is that our system is totally different from other countries, the way other countries operate. You go to America, you go to South Africa, just for example, the city of Johannesburg or the city of Maputo, you'll have the mayor having those executive powers. The mayor is in full control of the budget of the city. He makes sure that he goes all out to source funding for certain developments of the city. But how level malatseng la rona kana rona re le di council re bana ba ga gormento motona, which is central government. Gantsi we are not independent. We get most of our funding from central government. Really, it's a challenge to us. It's a very, very big challenge because we are relying on central government to give us money to develop roads. And abasa dire yalo, ora lorna we have bakle re tshwaregile ka mpore bogile matsogo. Jana bo ra hore go nna bokete tota hore we can deliver according to the expectations of the community kampo bone batho ba ile hore ke ba nne ba Gaborone.
Where is this blockage in the flow all the way to the national development?
In some cases, in particular in terms of development of fiscal developments, where we are talking about city developments, issues of water, electricity, roads, and so on, things that make towns. Often the problem is there are parallel planning systems. For instance, you have in Botswana what we call development plans. These are documents that we prepare to develop towns. But on the other side, you have what is called urban development plans. These run parallel One is physical, one is socio-economic. They run parallel and they are never brought together. In South Africa, for instance, you have what is called integrated planning system, where the two types of plans are brought together and it becomes very easy to, now you see there's a disjoint there, that's one problem. There are other disjoints where other plans that should be in place or budgeting systems, which are, if you can imagine a ladder, starting from a small town in Bobira, say Matatani, escalating that all the way along the ladder, right up to the National Development Plan. If we had a system like that and it can be put in place, those plans are missing. That's where the problem is.
And the relevant people to address this disjoint is the Ministry of Finance.
The relevant people are including you and me.
Okay.
Right up to the ministries and so on. That's why we have ministries anyway. But the ministries are there because we are here. They are there because we are supposed to be the tributaries that are feeding into them. If we don't talk like I'm talking to you now and here, I'm not then contributing anything. I'm assuming that as I'm saying this, I'll be challenged, and I'm challenging others, that this is what the democracy is about. This is what development is about. This is what the efficiency is about. I am hoping that someone is listening and is saying, oh my God, I mean, hey, we do not have a public transport system. And what is a public transport system? You hear, the operative word here is system. We have these taxis and so on and so on. The day you know that you have a public transport system is when you do not have these congestions and fumes and all that in the city.
We trust that our guests' breakdown of the situation enlightened all of us as to the origins of this congestion that we see in our cities. Next week, we explore possible solutions to the problem we have outlined with our contributors in tonight's episode. Stay tuned, as in the second segment of the show, we take a look at another sticking point in infrastructure development. This one goes beyond our city. Welcome back to First Issues. We will be speaking to the custodian of government infrastructure tenders to hear what they make of the several national projects that are running behind schedule, some by as many as 5 years, and costing the government millions of pula in escalation costs. Construction of the new terminal building at Sesaratsakama International Airport began on the 11th of April 5 years ago. And though it was meant to be completed by May 2010, the project is still ongoing. More than 116 million pula over budget. The original contractor, Sinohydro, was terminated in July last year. And according to Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Board, PPADB files, the procurement for replacing this main contractor is still ongoing. The integrated sports facilities at Francistown were meant to be completed in 2 years, that is by 2010. The project is still incomplete and is now 39 million pula over budget, with service provider Tuana Construction dismissed in June last year. The integrated sports facilities at Lobatse, on the other hand, were only delayed by 9 months, but at a staggering 54 million pula more than had been projected. To interrogate these disturbing weaknesses in project implementation, we speak to the parastatal organization charged with awarding tenders for the delivery of works, services and supply-related services for government, the PPADB. Asking the body's executive chairperson, Mrs. Bridget John, what she makes of the number of major national projects running behind schedule by years.
We need to get it right from the word go. Conceptualizing projects is very important, and it is the user who is in a better position to know what project they need to address what. So we have seen that in some of these delayed projects, the end product is not necessarily aligned to the intended objective. So the delayed projects are due to the design. Sometimes we even go to tender before the design is fully completed and people will be designing as they construct, the project will be at large. You can't control costs, the scope changes, it becomes unmanageable.
Recently, PPADB expressed concern regarding the lack of procurement skills at ministerial level. Could you quantify the cost of this lack of skill at the ministerial level?
We've already seen the consequences of those delays, cost overruns, and projects that are just not under control. So the cost to the nation is big. Services are delayed. Something we need to urgently attend to.
And what could be the immediate solutions to them, in addition to the possible long-term training?
The short-term solution to lack of procurement skills will involve hand-holding. At PPADB, from time to time, we second our staff to ministries to sort of sit with those who've been tasked with the mandate to progress procurement and just make sure that they understand the basics, they know what is expected of them, and we do run capacity building workshops for them. Recently, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Botswana Public Service College, where we believe our efforts will be much more organized and will bear fruit.
There is no doubt that some achievements have been made by the country's procurement system. Many people, however, have different views as to how the current system can be improved. To conclude, we asked our guest to take a look back and share with us what she thinks could have been done better.
We need to enhance accountability throughout the entire procurement process. There should be better role clarity, and there should be a stronger oversight.
It is now time for the stock market review, courtesy of the Botswana Stock Exchange.
We are looking at the performance of the BSE in the past week. In the past week, the DCI gained 1.1%, whereas the FCI remained unchanged. On a year-to-date basis, our DCI has appreciated by 13.6% in comparison to only 1.4% recorded in the same period in 2012. Our FCI in 2012 had only managed to gain a marginal 0.4%, whereas in 2013, on a year-to-date basis, our FCI is down by 1%. The amount of turnover recorded on the BSE in the past week was 32.7 million pula, generated from 11.9 million shares. This translates into average daily turnover of 8.2 million pula. Turnover means the value of shares traded on the exchange, and it is computed by taking the volume of shares traded and multiplying that by the price at which the shares traded. On a year-to-date basis, turnover amounted to 352.2 million pula, generated from 118.18 million shares. This gives us average daily turnover of 4.4 million pula. Now, comparing this with the same period in 2012, you'd find that our turnover in 2012 in the same period only amounted to 175.2 million pula, generated from 76.3 million shares.